Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, John was born on December 15th, 1939, in Grove City, Pennsylvania. He was the third in a family of three boys. His parents were Roland and Eleanor Harrison. He grew up in Stoneboro, Pennsylvania, and he was a graduate of high school in Mercer, Pennsylvania, and then attended Park College in Parksville, Missouri for his BA in social sciences, and then attained his master's degree in counseling at Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. He spent his career in the Air Force and his career as a special investigations officer, as a special agent, and it was a wonderful time that I know, Tom, as you shared with the family, as you boys grew up there in Pennsylvania and had the privilege of sharing there, not just with your parents, but with your grandparents there. John always enjoyed playing in the woods around his home there in Pennsylvania with his friends, and also with his grandparents. He, like I mentioned a moment ago, how John loved his grandsons. He also loved his grandpa when he was growing up, and he called his grandpa Haida. He couldn't say grandpa, and it's interesting how children get the names of their grandparents, and they'll hear somebody say something to somebody, like a greeting, like hi or something like that. And he called his grandma Hi Mom. And they lived next door, so they had a great time together. And they enjoyed going to the woods together, and I know that's where John began his love of hunting and fishing there in those days in Pennsylvania. A love that he carried on throughout all of his life, as he was a hunter, and he enjoyed it not just with a rifle, but with a bow and arrow also. And he enjoyed fishing. And Mercedes, when you and John, after a time of being stationed here in New Mexico during your Air Force career, you decided you liked it here so much that this is where you would retire, and you made a good choice. It's a great place to live, and how John loved these mountains and loved our own forest that we have here, and he loved fishing in the streams up in the Jemez Mountain. And he was quite a collector of fishing gear. He has lots of rods and reels and lures and all of those kinds of things that he so enjoyed in that. But that love began in those days he spent with his granddad. And he also enjoyed doing, as a young boy, riding on the railroad. His granddad was a railroad engineer, and a lot of times they would take rides on the train, and he could ride in the engine as they would weigh those coal cars and all those things like that. How much he so enjoyed doing that. And in 1957, right out of high school, John joined the United States Air Force and was stationed in Newfoundland, Canada. And Mercedes, that's where you met in there and began your love and your relationship, and then your 45 years that you spent time together. I think it's interesting that upon his retirement, some of his co-workers wrote some interesting comments about his service, not just the fact that he was involved in security for the United States Air Force. A lot of it was things that were very secret and things like that protected us in those days. But they wrote things like he was a real professional who really cared about his work, and that he made numerous invisible contributions to the security of the United States of America. And you and I share and enjoy our freedom and the protection that we have today as a result of the contributions that John made. Some that we obviously will never know what they were, but how how we enjoy our freedom today in that. Well, I know John loved his family and spending time with Debra and with Brian and with Gage and with Sam. And so I'm going to stop, and for a moment here we'll take some time and to ask some of you if you have a memory or a thought or a special story about John's life that maybe you would like to share with us here as we gather here for these moments and as we think about that. And I'm going to give you a moment to think about it, because I'm going to ask Jeff to start this time off and to come and to share a few personal thoughts with us, and then after that I'll give others of you the opportunity to do that. Jeff, would you come now, please, sir?
Thank you, Rick. My name is Jeff Forbes, and I live in Idaho Falls, Idaho, with my wife, Debra, and our son, Sam, and Deb is John's daughter, oldest child. I've known John since I first met Deb about 10 years ago, I guess it was, when we lived in Albuquerque here. And one thing that struck me about him right away was his subtle wit and dry humor. I even saw comments about that from some of his coworkers that had signed his retirement plaque that they'd given him. And he had almost a sarcastic sense of humor at times, I think. Another thing that I noted about him, John, was also a comment from some of his former coworkers. He seemed to have an unflappable manner and a calmness about him that just emanated from him. His love of fishing and hunting and archery and outdoors activities was immediately apparent when you went into his room and saw all of his archery bows and projects he was working on, fly tying, anything like that. He was always making plans for the next trip, the next turkey hunt. And now to find out that he had been involved, he'd liked outdoor activities ever since he was a little boy in Pennsylvania, I think his love of the outdoors is definitely strong in my wife, his daughter, Deb. And he also loved flea markets and garage sales, and he loved to go there and hunt for bargains. And frequently what he would do, he would see something, an old kid's toy like a tricycle or something like that needed work, and he would pick those up there and fix them up for Gage and then later for Sam, a bicycle, anything like that, some sort of a game, a Rector set. He was always accumulating those things for his two grandsons. And I remember in particular, he bought an old hobby horse when Sam was only, I don't know, about 2, maybe 1 or 2. And this thing needed a lot of work. It was about 50 years old and had the springs, and he had to glue up a lot of the pieces that were broken on it. And Sam rode on that hobby horse for quite a bit when he was a youngster when we lived here. One of the other things about John was he loved to tease, and especially his grandsons, well, also his children, I'm sure. But he used to tease Deb about being a vegetarian and eating sticks and twigs. And then Sam, he teased him to no end, I'm sure Gage too. But Sam had to implement a rule, which was no tickling or teasing. And so Sam would say, okay, now stop, no tickling or teasing. And then he would. But for people like me, I never knew my grandparents because they had died before I was born or when I was too young to remember. So I think for Gage and Sam, it's really great to have known John that well and Mercedes for such a long time. So in summary, I think John's life's been long and full and good, and he lived his life as best he could. And I'll turn it over to anyone else who'd like to say a few words. Thank you.
I believe I know most of the people here, and some of it I'm Colonel Frank Huey. I retired back here in 1989, and I was stationed here at Albuquerque at Kirtland from 1979 to 1983, and that's when I first met John and Mercedes. And I'd like to just make just a couple of short comments. What Jeff has said is exactly the way that I had pictured John, but let me just start out and say, I think I'd like to really open my comments and say, "Hi, Guy, how are you doing?" And some of you recognize that because that was John. That was John when we used to come down. We come down to visit. You go into the house and it's, "Hi, Guy, how you doing?" And despite all that's gone on in the last 6 months, since last July when he went in and had his operation and so on, every time that I saw John, whether it was in a hospital, whether it was in wherever it was at, "Hi, Guy, how you doing?" And I should be asking him, "Hi, Guy, how are you doing?" But he was asking me. And I think the important part of that is a week ago, I had not seen John for a period of time, and he had come home. I called on the phone. We went over to the house and went into the house, and this would have been a week ago last Saturday. Went into the house, and John was laying in bed. Walked in the door, and the first thing John said was, "Hi, Guy, how you doing?" Keeping in mind that John knew exactly where he was at that time. John knew how things were going. So he was exactly as Jeff had described and as I knew him. But I knew John, I think I was probably very lucky, very fortunate. I knew John in a different capacity. I knew him as John Harrison. I knew him as Chief Master Sergeant John Harrison. I knew him as Chief. I knew him as a friend. I knew him as my senior enlisted advisor for a period of time. Meaning within our organization, and we had units throughout Arizona and New Mexico, and John was the senior advisor for all of the enlisted troops that we had in our organization. And if something was going on out in the field and some young airman or whatever had a problem or something going on, John worked it for me. So he was my personal advisor and also had his relationship with the various troops in the field. And so, as I say, I was fortunate, and I could call him Chief, I could call him friend, I could call him John, I could call him whatever I wanted to call him. Sometimes I would say, "John, what are you doing? Why are you working on that?" So I think I was very, very, very fortunate. As Jeff kind of touched on it, I knew John also as a special investigator, as a special agent. He was an investigator with the Air Force. So another name, another title. John was in charge of what we call the source program, informant program. We had informants, we had sources, which some of you would be aware of, among various units around, as police departments do. And usually these sources are informants, and I made a couple notes here. They're usually the nuts, the misfits, the felons of the Air Force, the people that have had problems. They're using drugs, they're doing this, they're doing that. We worked with them and got information about other major crimes, bigger crimes. John worked with them as the source manager, what we call the source manager for our organization in Arizona and New Mexico. And as a source manager, he had to work with and probably advise and assist the various other investigators we had in working with these sources. Well, at that time, we had a lot of drug activity, illegal drug activity and so on, going on. And there's a government program in which if an individual is found to be involved in drugs, the government can confiscate the vehicle or whatever might belong to the individual, or the fruits of the crime, so to speak, different things that if he was using a vehicle to transport drugs in, then the government could seize, under appropriate authority, could seize the individual's vehicle. Well, within the Air Force, we really didn't have a means to dispose of vehicles. We really weren't going to go out and seize a lot of vehicles. They would do it more in the local police department and so on. But John was always in favor of seizing vehicles. I mean, that was John's idea to me. And one day I can recall that he walked into to my office, and the secretary is sitting there, and what John had in mind, it wasn't just seizing vehicles. And John was dead serious about this. John wanted to seize horses. He said, we've got some beautiful horses out there being used in these things. So we can get some horses for our use within the office. And more importantly, I think I've got a lead on a nice airplane. That was John. And if I had turned John loose, we would have had horses and we would have had an airplane. That's exactly, if he made up his mind to do something, that's exactly the way that he did it. Okay. As was mentioned, John's interests, other than his family, and I think the family was his number one interest, but John was he was interested in this hunting and fishing, that type of thing, and he was a very private person, and yet a very caring and a very knowledgeable person with everybody, with his coworkers, with myself, whether it was a senior officer or an airman who had been in the service for a week and a half or whatever it was. But John was just that type of person. I had already made up my mind I was going to say something about the flea market, and it was touched on before, and that was after we retired, we lived up in Colorado, and I never had to call John and say, we're coming back to Albuquerque, because if we came to Albuquerque, old people like me enjoy flea markets. And we would go to the flea market, and it could be guaranteed we would run into John Harrison in the flea market. It was on every weekend, John was at the flea market. So that's kind of the way that went. Let me just kind of wrap up my comments and just say, John is going to be missed not only by his family, but by a lot of people who've known him over the years. People who've known him during his 26 years in the Air Force. John at one time was a security policeman up at the Air Force Academy. So he had a lot of friends up there. John had served in Germany before he came back here to Albuquerque. What would happen when they're getting ready to assign people at various locations? Sometimes you would get an advance notice of who was coming. And I had never met John before, but somebody said, okay, we've got this individual coming out of Germany who's coming back here, a guy by the name of John Harrison. Hey, you're going to like him. Everybody likes John. He's super. He's not, you won't even, on one hand, you'll know he's here because of what he's accomplishing. On the other hand, you won't even know he's here because it's done quietly. It's done within the system, working with everybody. And that was exactly what happened when John got here. So as I say, wrapping it up, I think he's going to be missed by all of us, and most importantly by certainly Mercedes and the family. But I would say this in my departure here this morning, and just saying, hi, Guy. Hi, John. How's it going? I'm sure he's enjoying the great flea market in the sky and the happy hunting ground in the sky. And that's what John is enjoying. That is John Harrison. So, hi, Guy. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and Jeff, thank you. Is there anybody else that has a thought or memory? Gage, you going to say something? Come on up here.
Usually when I would come up here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I would see Grandpa, and I would run up to him and hug him. And usually every day we would either go up to the archery range and shoot and one time I had tried to shoot a 90-yard and I missed the 90 but got an 80. But first, before I did that, Grandpa said, "I don't think you can do that." And when I did it, he was just like, "Whoa." At least every day we would do at least two or one thing together. Thank you.
Thank you, Gage. Thank you. Your cousin are very fortunate, as Jeff said a moment ago, to have had your granddad as long as you guys have. And I think if you can do two or one thing with your granddad every day, what a wonderful privilege that is to share in that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there another? Well, we can just sense certainly from Gage's comments and from a friend's comment, from family comments, the wonderful testimony and the life that John had, that he left with you, and how wonderful it is that these memories will always be with you. And I encourage you to let those be the strength that helps you walk from this place today. We'll have a closing prayer for our service here, and then our director of our service will come in and talk to you about the final honor that will be paid to John, which will be paid by our country at the National Cemetery. So let's pray together. Father, how wonderful it is that even through tears of a little boy's eyes, we can see the greatness of a man. And I'm so thankful that John took time to touch Gage and Sam's lives, as well as all of those around him whom he loved. So, Father, again, I want to commit this family to you for your ministry as we commit John to you, for your care, till that time when we shall all be joined together again. For I pray